it's not.
My voting. I thought you were filling it out for all of us.
You should have.
You can, Misha is not voting.
Misha's not. You are.
So, I don't believe we have received any written comment. Is there a motion for approval of minutes of 9 December 2024?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, reports and updates. This brings us to our annual report of administrators.
How exciting. No, it is actually very exciting. If you recall from last year after the high school went through its sort of NEAS review, we worked on our, what we call buckets, but our goals, and just sort of adjusted them a little bit based on some of that work, because it's all tied to what we're doing sort of district-wide. And there are 5 goals, and I'll sort of read those, and then give an opportunity for board members to sort of look that over, and then we'll share a little bit within each of the goals. The way that we've structured our report is, well, goal 1 is strengthening the learning culture and just making sure that student learning and that our learning practices maximize the impact of learning on each student. Goal 3 is the support of professional practices. So being sure that the practices that we support are in place that are tied to improve learning. Goal 4 is the construct of learning support, and what that means is to ensure that the school has the appropriate systems in place to support student well-being and student learning. And then finally, goal 5, ensuring the learning resources, and so that schools have the resources available to meet goal 4, goal 3, goal 2, and goal 1. And so folks just want to take a minute or two just to sort of take a look at it, and then you can ask some questions, and I can hit some of the high points. Some of the work that we've done in structure this in the sense of sort of looking back, and our hope is that you sort of see the coherence between where we've been and the work that we're doing overall. And so last March we were sort of carrying that through into going into this year in terms of what we're looking for and the types of supports we're trying to create for our teachers and doing the work that we're doing. In terms of the student learning practices, one of the pieces that we've been talking about in review of the year prior in piloting and adopting literacy programs that employ effective teaching strategies based on the science of reading, and that we're continuing to pilot and utilizing resources moving into this year that sort of have those specific strategies sort of embedded in their work. Goal three, continuing job-embedded professional development through the use of instructional coaches. Part of that you'll see are continue to work with the All Learners Project, though that is not a specific coach that's able to be here. In our specific schools, they do work within our common studies to sort of continue that coaching in mathematics. Though due to the lack of some of the federal funds that have disappeared, some of our instructional coaching has thinned as compared to last year, but that's something, in looking ahead is something we want to continue to sort of think about growing. And sort of thinking about the administrative team in going forward and identifying areas of growth and leadership is something that we're working on. In terms of construction learning supports, specifically MTSS has carried us over the last couple of years in terms of my time here and really sort of focusing on our tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 practices, and work everything from looking at growing our pre-K programs to the fact that we have teachers piloting a form of assessment with gold with our pre-Kers is something that's sort of tied to that work. And in terms of ensuring resources is just sort of making sure that the support that we're able to provide at the AOS level has impact in the schools, or each one of the schools. So that's sort of the major goal, and hopefully you can see those through lines as you have a quick glance at the goal areas. And we're happy, and my team is happy to answer any questions.
Misha and Karen.
This is a small question, but what is PLO as opposed to PD?
Professional learning opportunity.
So what is the when you say that,
Yeah, we call, basically those are after-school opportunities which we can't require.
okay.
So we offer them, we stipend them, try to support in that space.
Okay. Thanks.
So, I'm not trying to do any kind of a gotcha question here or anything, but I was approached very recently by a high school teacher who expressed concern that there is a reading deficiency with several students at the high school that it's higher than it should be. And I'm wondering how much of goal 2 is, concerning itself with making sure that our reading standards are where they need to be. I'm assuming this is probably something that's coming out of COVID and the fact that kids just don't read books anymore. They either, maybe using ChatGPT or, they're listening. I know I'm guilty of that. I don't read books very often anymore either. I listen to them because I'm too busy. But just was hoping to hear a little bit about where we are with that.
It's very layered. Do you want to start, or I'm just thinking about systematic instruction?
Yeah, the younger grades.
Oh, we'd start there. Okay.
Yeah, the younger grades, we definitely over the last 4 years been providing professional development for teachers on the science of reading and what that means and how they could bring those practices. What are the best practices around reading and the different components of it, and then we look for research-based programs or materials that support that, those best practices. So luckily the foundation's resource that we were already using is one of the best for phonics instruction. So we were set up in that way, but there were some gaps in comprehension and other areas that we filled in those lower grades. So we'll see how that will continue to keep providing PD and looking for ways to support that. But there was a gap.
I'll add to that in terms of the MTSS work that we've been doing. And when I'm meeting with administrators and chatting with them, and they're sort of talking about how they're utilizing their early release days or in trying to build in within their own schedules, utilizing AimsWeb, which is a new tool we've been using for 2 years now, consistently across the district, and using that data in an actionable way. It's assessment data, so it's very specific about what the skills that might be lacking, but they're using that within their MTSS programs, and if students are struggling in tier 1 and then utilizing tier 2 instruction to meet their needs, and then testing them again in around 6 weeks. And so being able to have a real consistent tool that you're able to look at and utilize for discrete instruction. And part of the science of reading is making sure you're doing some explicit instruction around phonics and the ability to put words together and make coherent sounds and understanding of those words. And so that's sort of part of that process. I don't know if that high school teacher is talking about seniors, that wasn't necessarily happening, or if it's talking about freshmen. Some of our MTSS work has been very recent in terms of the systematic approach that we've been trying to do with our schools, I would say, over the last 3 years.
And I don't know how to say this cleanly, so I'm just gonna, you'll have to help me out a little bit. I think there's a few other things happening. Clearly, the technology is shifting culturally, right? Where kids are spending their downtime. They're not reading books when they're bored, right? They're on their phones. So they're not getting the reps. And I also know that culturally homework is kind of it's not easy for a teacher to assign reading anymore and expect it to get done. So that definitely, is an impact. I also know that part of our MTSS work and really our first journey into, proficiency-based education was making sure everybody had what they needed, making sure all standards. And back in the day, I think when I first was hired, we were at an 82% on-time graduation rate. So, the notion that I'm now responsible for everybody certainly puts a spotlight on those who aren't, meeting the standards. So I think there's a lot happening here. And yes, we are always engaged with make it better. Yeah.
I do. I am curious about Trevor Reagan on growth mindset and the correlation to grading. Marches when you do it, they're not grading practices in particular.
No. A couple years ago, I think you might be a little newer to the board. I can't remember when you came in. It's all a blur. But we kind of did some reframing on our proficiency-based education language. We're calling it equity-based grading practices because we were pretty locked at it. It's not true, and we were really going for the science-based tenets to make sure we were doing just aligning up with not a rigid format, but more discernment on the part of teachers and so forth. So we did some re-education and reteaching, and Trevor is really big on the growth mindset piece, and we've been working with him to help us re-educate via that those tenets, and I can share that with you at the document that was in one of the notes.
Great, thank you.
We need refreshers. We need to understand what's involved there, so we're connecting that with that work.
Thank you.
I kind of connect so 2 and 3, but I think at the higher level, like the board and the administrators have done a lot of work to see us as one district in this. I mean, at least theoretical curriculum and policies and everything, but what are we doing to make sure, say, for example, that we're offering the same opportunities that like every 7th or 8th grader or whatever who tests for algebra has the opportunity to have, or not just that, but any that we're having equality of opportunity across the school, so that it's not sort of a maybe you would all come to that, but that we can truly lock down that everyone's having that equity of opportunity.
I think I know what you're asking, and more specifically, I think that we've been working with building principals, trying to talk a little bit earlier about programming, so to make sure that their schedule, trying to and get creative, because it means sometimes we share resources, sometimes we, I would say in terms of our work and really moving forward, I think we want to be more explicit on what those expectations are. And right now, a lot of our scope and sequence is sort of basically like the order of things, both horizontally and vertically, or just in title, right? And what that means is very different. When it says American Revolution, right? Like, what does that mean? Right? That's all it says in our scope and sequence. You're teaching the American Revolution. So we're trying to unpack that, be like, okay, this is what all our kids need to know, understand.
That's exactly
tasks.
what I'm asking.
Yeah, okay. So, so we are starting to map that out, and it's we're working. Common Studies as being a really important place to do that work, because it also shares. Okay, this is what the American Revolution should mean. This is what we think. Right? You have to your essentials, and then this is what we're actually doing. Right? And if it what's getting in the way of that? Time, scheduling, resources, and so forth. And then if it can't live here because it's important, and I'm hearing a lot of it in Vision of Graduate kind of stories. We want kids to understand our government. Then maybe it moves to the high school, and we've been having those preliminary conversations too about the things that come out of this vision of a graduate are going to be non-negotiables, and we're going to have to build, and it might be moving things around. So that is a long-term project.
So I think last year there was some work that was done to try and get teachers from across the district in grade cohorts and with teacher leaders. And I was just curious how that's going.
Yeah, and that's in our report, Common Study Leaders, and we just recently did a survey to sort of reevaluate, how things are going. It's the first time we've done this at the K-8 level. The high school has had it longer in a different structure, and we had a discussion at the retreat that you had talked a little bit about, Rhonda, at our last board meeting, and we just consulted with our school coach and said, okay, like now what are our next steps? Because this first iteration was definitely building while we, refining it. But now we've learned a lot. We've gotten a lot of feedback. We're not done with the feedback. We still have some processing to do, but our intent is to build stronger for the next 3-year cohort. And we'll probably have more information on that in the February note on what that's going to look like and how it's going to be different. Because we do know teacher efficacy is a really core component. This belief that together, working together, they can actually improve teaching and learning to good, healthy, vibrant schools. So we're continuing to support that work. But we know our first iteration was a decent iteration, and we're going to do better on ourselves.
Okay, thank you.
We have no discussion items, so moving on to consideration of approval of fiscal year 26 budget.
You're gonna have 3 pieces of paper coming up here. No, 2 pieces of paper. Going around. All right, and so after our last meeting, we went around and talked thinking about the needs in terms of that transition of CDS services coming to schools. And that we were doing that preparation and a reminder that we're doing that work starting next year with that position. That part of that position was not only the consideration of making sure we have the structures in place ready for when the law says you have a responsibility for those kids, but we also had the conversation of recognizing that right now a lot of our kids that are currently in our that are coming into our schools as pre-Kers and might be in community settings aren't necessarily getting some of those needs, whether that's speech, OT, or PT, that make a really big difference in terms of their integration into a pre-K program and then eventually into compulsory education starting at kindergarten. And so that position is sort of doing two things. It's finding those children and then making sure they're getting those services, and in some cases those services may be within our schools prior to the official start date. And then also at the same time making sure we have all the pieces necessary so that when they're officially ours, we're ready to go, because there is no, that the state isn't necessarily ramping up, they're saying this is when you're responsible for them. We are still considering the idea of starting in cohort 3, which would be the 26-27 school year. And so that seemed to be a point, after that discussion. So I haven't made any changes in the budget in the sense of within that position and maintaining it. There are opportunities if we are serving kids next year, starting next year, that we would be able to get some reimbursement from the state through CDS, because we're still that organization, in terms of if we have kids that are doing services for speech, then we can get reimbursed for that, ensuring that they're getting that. If there are needs around OT and PT, we're ensuring that we're getting those. But also, in these early stages, we're sitting at the table when IEPs are being created. So CDS might be creating some IEPs for 3-year-olds, but we'll be at the table to ensure that we have a heads up of what's coming our way for our students. And so, I think it was really important, and that discussion really helped sort of flesh out what that position would be. In terms of thinking about, if we're in the cohort, and right now the state is in cohort 1, that idea of funding coming from the state, if you join cohort 3, well then there's per pupil funds, that would come for students that are identified as students in need within that population. And the idea that, and this is an idea, is utilizing the CDS hubs that exist within counties right now to sort of act as main care billing hubs for schools, because some of that main care billing has expanded, and utilizing their expertise, because they have been doing it, to be able to get more support in terms of the work that we're doing. And so, there's a period of time where we are working on supporting those students and supporting schools when they're coming in, and then eventually we join cohort 3, and if nothing has changed in terms of the model through cohort 1 and cohort 2 in terms of that funding mechanism, we'll start seeing some of those funds in terms of supporting kids. I did not have an opportunity to chat with state officials at the last Hancock County superintendent's meeting because of the storm that occurred, and many schools were without power and starting early, so it was more important for us to focus on making sure our schools were open than doing that. But at our next meeting, I'm sure those pieces will come up, at least for me, in terms of what it's looking like across the state. So the budget that you see in front of you is the same one that we've had with the increases of the budget to budget at 22.9% and the assessment at 24%. That includes those specific needs in special education and the HR. It's one of the comments is we've been sort of kicking that down the road for a number of years in terms of having specific support around human resources within our schools to allow our principals to do their jobs, rather than sort of doing some of that personnel management.
And it's also letting teachers express that, like return and things like that. It makes it easier.
And I think at the last meeting, I sort of shared the, in terms of your current budget, you're looking at, 1% or just below to maybe a 1.8% increase into your local budgets based on the AOS budget. And so I had shared that that range was between $10,000 for the smallest schools, about $10,000 that would support the AOS budget, to the largest schools, $165,000 or so. And then our intermediate schools was around, that would be our Penatics, our Tremonts, our Truttons, Mount Desert, in the range of $60,000 to $70,000, depending on your student population and the size of your budget. But those were the ranges of amounts of dollars that the AOS budget was asking for from the schools if we were to choose that one.
Questions or somebody that need an option?
I move to approve the 25-26 AOS 91 budget at $3,309,957.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. So, great work, everyone. Moving on, renewal of contract and adjustment of salary for superintendent effective 7/1/25. And I think we have okay.
Oh, no, I don't. Thank you, Susan.
Okay. Is there a motion for that, for the renewal of contract? I can bring up something to you for June measure. Yeah.
I move to renew Superintendent Savory's 260-day contract and extend it through June 30th, 2022, with an annual salary of $178,500 starting July 1, 2025.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, and our final action item is approval to set date and time for annual budget meeting and approve and sign warrant for annual budget meeting. And if you're on your computer, but I have a motion if someone wants to move that.
I move that the warrant for the AOS budget meeting for Mount Desert as a regional school system is hereby approved with a total budget figure of $2,399,257. AOS budget meeting is hereby called January 22nd, 2025, for the purpose of voting on the central office budget for the AOS for the 2025-2026 fiscal year.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any Okay, that brings us to the end of our.
And then we have to sign.
Yes, we have to sign, so, okay.
Two copies.
Oh, there, okay, so we can, two copies, yes, there are, okay.
Just in case I drop.
Just in case.
Can you just confirm that date is a Wednesday, right? So we usually meet on Mondays, but that's a Wednesday. Right. What time is it? Thank you.
Is there any other business while that's going around? Okay, any public comment? Okay, and then we just said the next meeting will be, well, our next regular meeting will be Monday, 13th January 2025. Time to be determined, probably 6. And then the public budget meeting is Wednesday, 22nd of January. I'll wait to do a motion.
I would just like to say, well, number one, after we adjourn, we have our annual cupcakes for a little thank you for the amount of work that you all put in with the AOS. And so it's been a tradition to have food, and we've kind of transitioned to lovely cupcakes made locally. But I also, want to thank you all for the work that you do every day in support of your communities, your schools, and your teachers. You ask excellent questions and are supportive of your administrators and your teachers, and most importantly, of the students, to ensure that they have the best opportunities as they make their ways through our school system. So, I'm immensely grateful for everything that you all do.
We're very grateful for your work and for all of your years.
Couldn't do it without all of them.
Work. Susan, it's your year to be a board member because so much work has accomplished by it. Really, like, this was just learning.
Yes, there's the learning curve.
We'll let that finish going around, but is there a motion to adjourn?
Karen, did you see?
Yes, you signed the second.
Second round. Yes, and we'll make sure.
Yeah.
Second.
There's no discussion, I'm sorry.
No, I just